In the winter of 1944, German tank crews made a discovery that shattered their confidence in Panzer superiority forever. After capturing an American M4A3E8 Easy-8 Sherman and testing it against their prized Tiger tanks, they were forced to admit a shocking truth. The American 76mm gun could penetrate their armor at ranges where their own legendary 88mm cannons couldn't even hit back. It was a moment that would fundamentally change tank warfare on the Western Front. The story begins in the snow-covered forests of the Ardennes, December 1944. The last great German offensive of the war was underway, and Oberleutnant Klaus Hoffman of the 501st Heavy Tank Battalion stood with his commander, examining their prize. Through the falling snow, the captured American Sherman tank seemed almost pitiful compared to their massive Tiger tanks parked nearby. "The Americans call this one the Easy-8, said Colonel Werner Becker, tapping the olive-drab hull with his gloved hand. "Command wants us to evaluate it thoroughly. They don't believe reports from the Eastern Front that this upgraded model is causing problems." Hoffman nodded skeptically. Like most German tank commanders, he'd been raised on stories of Panzer superiority, how their tanks were engineering marvels that could destroy 5 American tanks for each one lost. The Sherman was notoriously nicknamed the Ronson or Tommy Cooker for how quickly it would burst into flames when hit. "Hard to believe this could threaten our Tigers," Hoffman said, walking around the American tank. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Colonel Becker's expression remained serious. Intelligence says they've upgraded the gun. This model carries a high-velocity 76mm instead of the Disker, old 75mm pop gun. Our forward units report losing tanks at unusual ranges. He paused, brushing snow from his shoulder. Berlin doesn't believe it. What happened over the next 72 hours would become classified information that wouldn't be fully revealed until decades after the war ended. Hoffman was assigned to lead the testing team, comprised of the 501st's best gunners, mechanics, and armor experts. They transported the captured Sherman to Proving Ground East, a secret testing facility near Bad Frankenhausen. There, far from Allied aircraft, they could properly evaluate the enemy's technology. The team spent the first day examining every aspect of the Sherman's construction. Master Sergeant Otto Brandt, their chief mechanic, climbed inside the turret and whistled. "The Americans have improved the ergonomics. The gunner can acquire targets faster." "What about the armor?" Hoffman asked. "Still inferior to ours," replied Captain Dieter Müller, their armor specialist. "But they've made it more sloped, which effectively increases protection without adding weight. Clever, but not revolutionary." The German engineers were most interested in the new 76mm gun. Unlike the older models they'd encountered earlier in the war, this Sherman variant carried the longer M1A1 cannon with a distinctive muzzle brake and counterweight. "This isn't like the others," said Sergeant Brandt, measuring the barrel length. "It's a completely different weapon system." Colonel Becker arrived that evening to review their findings. He wasn't impressed. "Technical specifications are one thing. Tomorrow we see how it performs in actual firing tests against our armor." Dawn broke cold and clear on the second day. The testing ground had been prepared with distance markers ranging from 100 to 2,500 meters. 3 disabled Tiger tanks were positioned as targets vehicles too damaged for frontline service, but with intact armor plates perfect for ballistic testing. Hoffman had selected Corporal Franz Weber, their best gunner, to operate the Sherman. Weber had spent the night studying the captured tank's fire control system. "It's different, sir," he reported. "Simpler in some ways, but the stabilizer helps maintain aim while moving something our tanks don't have." Colonel Becker observed from a concrete bunker as the tests began. The first rounds were fired at close range, just 500 meters, to establish baseline penetration data. The crack of the 76mm gun echoed across the proving ground. Through binoculars, Hoffman watched as the American armor-piercing round struck the Tiger's front plate and impossibly punched straight through. "Confirm that hit," he ordered, not trusting his eyes. Captain Muller's voice crackled over the radio. "Confirmed penetration, clean through the front glacis at 30-degree angle." A murmur ran through the observation bunker. Colonel Becker remained silent, his expression darkening. They continued testing at increasing ranges: 800 meters, 1,000 meters, 1,000, 200 meters. The Sherman's gun continued to score penetrations on the Tiger's side armor, and, at the right angle, even the front armor thought to be impervious to all but the largest Allied tank guns. By mid-afternoon, the results were becoming undeniable. Hoffman ordered a Tiger tank to be made operational, with Weber now commanding the German vehicle. The two tanks would engage in a simulated duel at various ranges. The first engagement began at 1,500 meters. The Tiger fired first and missed. The Sherman returned fire and scored a hit that would have disabled the Tiger's track in combat. They reset and tried again, this time at 1,800 meters. Both tanks missed their first shots, but the Sherman landed its second round directly on the Tiger's turret ring, a kill shot in actual combat. Colonel Becker's face had turned to stone. "Once more," he ordered. "Maximum effective range." At 2,100 meters, well beyond what German intelligence believed the Sherman could effectively engage, the unthinkable happened. The American tank scored a direct hit on the Tiger's side armor that penetrated completely, while the Tiger's 88mm shell fell short. That evening, in the officers' quarters, the mood was somber. Decades of German pride in their tank technology had been shaken to the core. "How is this possible?" demanded Colonel Becker, reviewing the test data. "Our intelligence said the Sherman was inferior in every respect." Hoffman studied the penetration charts. "The Americans have improved the ammunition as well as the gun. This new round, they call it HVAP, tungsten core. It's unlike anything we've faced before. Higher velocity, better penetration characteristics." Captain Muller nodded grimly. "And the gun can elevate higher and traverse faster than our Tigers. In the right hands, it can acquire and hit targets before our gunners can respond. The weight difference is significant too," added Sergeant Brandt. "The Sherman weighs 35 tons to our Tiger's 56. It's more maneuverable, uses less fuel, and can cross bridges we can't." Colonel Becker slammed his fist on the table. "We've been outmaneuvered, not just on the battlefield but in development. While we built bigger, heavier tanks, they improved what they had. On the third day, they conducted mobility tests. The Sherman easily climbed slopes that caused the Tiger to struggle, crossed soft ground where the heavier German tank bogged down, and demonstrated superior operational range on less fuel. The final report Hoffman drafted was classified at the highest level. Its conclusions were stark. The upgraded Sherman represented a significant threat to German armoured forces, capable of engaging and defeating their tanks at ranges where they had previously felt safe. More damning was the production comparison. For every Tiger tank Germany produced with tremendous effort and resources, the Americans were building 50 Shermans. And now these weren't inferior tanks, they were deadly opponents that could win at range, in mobility, and through sheer numbers. Colonel Becker personally delivered the report to Berlin. When he returned a week later, his expression told Hoffman everything. "They refused to believe it," Becker said quietly, pouring himself a schnapps. "The High Command said our methodology must be flawed. They've ordered a new series of tests with different parameters. But the data is conclusive," Hoffman protested. "This war isn't just fought with tanks, Hoffman. It's fought with perceptions and beliefs. The myth of German technological superiority is too important to morale." Becker stared into his glass. "History is written by those who control the narrative." But reality couldn't be denied on the battlefield. In the months that followed, Hoffman watched as Sherman tanks with the distinctive long-barreled 76mm guns appeared in greater numbers. Tiger crews began reporting engagement losses at unprecedented ranges. The mystique of invulnerability that had surrounded German tanks was evaporating. In March 1945, Hoffman's own Tiger was knocked out by a Sherman firing from a ridge nearly 2 kilometers away, exactly the scenario their tests had predicted. As he pulled his wounded driver from the burning tank, he remembered the dismissed report gathering dust in Berlin. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By April, as American forces pushed deeper into Germany, Hoffman found himself reassigned to one of the new Tiger II unit's tanks, even heavier and supposedly more powerful than the original Tiger. But these engineering marvels suffered from the same fundamental problems. They were too few, too heavy, too slow, and too fuel-hungry. During a desperate defense near the Ruhr Valley, Hoffman watched through his binoculars as a column of EZ-8 Shermans outflanked his position, using their mobility to attack where his tanks couldn't respond quickly enough. They learned from their mistakes, he told his gunner as they hurried to reposition, while we doubled down on ours. 2 weeks before the German surrender, Hoffman sat in a field hospital, recovering from wounds sustained when his Tiger II was hit by 3 Shermans simultaneously. A junior officer brought him a newspaper with propaganda, claiming new wonder weapons would soon turn the tide. Hoffman smiled sadly, remembering that winter day at the proving ground when he'd seen the truth with his own eyes. The myth of inherent German superiority had cost them dearly. While German engineers had built impressive machines, the Americans had built the right machine, and thousands of them. In his diary that night, he wrote words that military historians would quote decades later. "The greatest defeat isn't on the battlefield, but in the mind that refuses to adapt when confronted with evidence. We lost this war not when we were outproduced or outgunned, but when we became so enamored with our own mythology that we could no longer recognize reality." Years after the war, Hoffman would meet American tank commander Samuel Harrison at a veterans reunion in Belgium. Over drinks, he finally told the story of testing the captured Sherman. "We knew," Harrison laughed. "Our intelligence picked up rumors about your tests. It's why we accelerated production of the 76mm guns. By the time you figured out what you were facing, we had thousands of them rolling off the assembly lines." "The greatest irony," Hoffman replied, "is that your Sherman was considered inadequate by your own tankers. They wanted something better." Harrison nodded. "The Pershing, if that had arrived in numbers earlier." He didn't need to finish the thought. "Technology isn't everything," Hoffman concluded. "It's the willingness to see clearly and adapt quickly. Your country did that. Mine refused." The lesson echoed far beyond that single proving ground test in 1944. In warfare, as in life, success often comes not to those with the most impressive capabilities, but to those most willing to honestly assess both their strengths and weaknesses and adapt accordingly. The story of the captured Sherman reveals a universal truth. No advantage lasts forever, and no disadvantage needs to be permanent. It's the ability to learn, adapt, and overcome that ultimately determines who prevails, on battlefields and beyond. During the spring of 1945, as Allied forces pushed deeper into Germany, the findings from Hoffman's tests began circulating among tank commanders on both sides. American crews, who had once approached German tanks with dread, now hunted them with newfound confidence, while German Tiger commanders abandoned their traditional tactics of frontal engagement in favor of ambush and retreat. Colonel Becker, who had initially dismissed Hoffman's concerns, found himself reassigned to an obscure administrative post after Berlin received field reports that matched exactly what the tests had predicted. His replacement, Major Wilhelm Steiner, summoned Hoffman to battalion headquarters in a small village near Dresden. "I've been reviewing your report from the proving grounds," Steiner said without preamble, spreading papers across a makeshift desk in what had once been a schoolhouse. "You're the only officer in this battalion who truly understands what we're facing." Hoffman stood at attention. "The Sherman's advantages are significant but not insurmountable, sir, if we adjust our tactics." "Tactics?" Steiner interrupted with a bitter laugh. "We're down to 30% fuel allocation. Half our Tigers are immobilized for lack of spare parts. The Luftwaffe can no longer keep Allied aircraft from hunting us at will." He gestured to a map showing the shrinking German territory. But command still expects us to hold back the Americans with technical superiority we no longer possess. The following morning, Hoffman led a reconnaissance mission to assess American tank movements near the Elbe River. What he witnessed changed his understanding of the war's inevitable conclusion. Columns of EZ-8 Shermans, hundreds of them crossed pontoon bridges that would have collapsed under a tiger's weight. They moved with a fluid coordination his own units could never achieve, supported by aircraft and mobile artillery in a combined arms approach that Germany could no longer match. Through his binoculars, Hoffman observed American crews casually refueling their tanks in open fields, something no German tank commander would dare with constant fuel shortages and air attacks. He watched mechanics replace damaged track sections in under an hour, when the same repair on a Tiger would take a full day with specialized equipment. "They don't need the perfect tank," he murmured to his radio operator. "They've created the perfect system." When they returned to base, Hoffman found the remnants of their battalion preparing for a counterattack ordered by divisional command. Major Steiner unfolded the operations map with visible reluctance. "We're to strike this American column at dawn," he explained, indicating a road junction. "Command believes their supply lines are overextended and vulnerable." Hoffman studied the terrain. "Sir, this puts us crossing open ground for 2 kilometers. The new Shermans can hit us at that range while remaining hull down behind these ridges." "I know," Steiner said quietly. "That's why I'm altering the plan. We'll use the remaining Tigers as a blocking force here," he pointed to a forested area, "while sending our Panther battalion on a flanking maneuver through this valley. At least some of them might survive. And our orders from division?" Steiner met his gaze. "Sometimes survival requires selective interpretation of orders, Hoffman. The Reich is finished, whatever Berlin claims. My responsibility now is to these men." That night, as engineers prepared the remaining operational Tigers for battle, Hoffman found Sergeant Brandt making modifications to their tank's armor. "What are you doing?" Hoffman asked, watching as crews welded additional steel plates to the turret rings and ammunition storage areas, vulnerable points identified during their tests with the captured Sherman. "Applying your research, sir," Brandt replied without looking up from his work. "If the American 76mm guns target these weak spots, we might at least give our crews a chance to bail out before the ammunition cooks off." By dawn, 8 Tigers and 12 Panthers were in position. Through morning mist, they watched the American column approach 30 Shermans with infantry support, exactly where intelligence had predicted. But instead of the expected frontal assault, the German tanks remained concealed, waiting for the perfect moment. "Hold fire until my command," Hoffman radioed. "Target lead and rear vehicles first to trap the column." The ambush worked initially. 3 Shermans erupted in flames before the Americans realized they were under attack. But what happened next demonstrated everything Hoffman had learned about the evolving nature of tank warfare. Instead of panicking, the American tanks immediately executed a disciplined response. Some created a smoke screen, while others took up defensive positions. Within minutes, artillery shells began landing with precision around the German positions, followed by fighter bombers that seemed to appear from nowhere. "They've coordinated with air support," Hoffman realized. "They're fighting as a combined force." 2 Tigers were knocked out in the first airstrike. A third lost its track to artillery. When the smoke cleared enough to see, the remaining American tanks had disappeared from the road and were now advancing through terrain the Germans had thought impassable for armor. "They're flanking us," reported one of the Panther commanders, "coming through the marshland to the south." "Impossible," replied another voice. "No tank can cross that ground." But the Shermans, with their moderate weight and wider tracks, managed what the heavier German tanks could not. The first indication of their approach was a series of high-velocity rounds striking the Panther's side armor from an unexpected direction. "Disengage," ordered Major Steiner. "Fall back to secondary positions." The retreat became chaotic as German tanks struggled through muddy terrain that bogged down their heavier vehicles. Hoffman watched a Tiger sink to its hull in ground that the pursuing Shermans crossed with relative ease. By nightfall, only 3 Tigers and 5 Panthers had reached the fallback position. Major Steiner was among the casualties, his tank hit by multiple 76mm rounds that, just as Hoffman's tests had predicted, penetrated precisely at the turret join where armor was thinnest. As the senior surviving officer, Hoffman found himself in command of the battered remnants of what had once been an elite unit. He gathered his remaining crews in an abandoned barn. "We've been fighting the wrong war," he told them, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Our high command built weapons for the war they wanted to fight, not the war that exists." "What do we do now, sir?" asked a young Panther commander whose face was streaked with soot and oil. Hoffman was silent for a long moment. "We adapt, or we perish." The next 3 days saw a remarkable transformation in how Hoffman's small battle group operated. Abandoning the traditional German reliance on firepower and frontal armor, they adopted hit-and-run tactics that maximized their tanks' remaining advantages, the accuracy of the 88mm gun and low silhouette when in defensive positions. They disabled their radios except for brief coded transmissions to prevent American direction finding. They moved only at night when Allied air superiority was less overwhelming. Most importantly, they chose their battles carefully, engaging only when terrain and circumstances favored them. Against all odds, they managed to knock out 7 Shermans without losing another Tiger. The American advance slowed as tank commanders became more cautious, wary of the unseen threat lurking in the forests and villages. On April 28, 1945, with Soviet forces approaching from the east and Americans from the west, Hoffman received orders to join the final defense of Berlin. Looking at his fuel gauges, none showing more than a quarter tank, he knew it was a suicide mission they couldn't accomplish, even if they wanted to. That evening, he called his remaining officers to a council of war. "Berlin has fallen in all but name," he told them, spreading a map across the hood of a truck. "Hitler is trapped in his bunker. The war is lost." "So we surrender?" asked Lieutenant Wegner, their youngest officer. "No," Hoffman replied. "We save what can be saved. Not our tanks or our pride, but our men. Their lives shouldn't be thrown away for a cause already defeated." Before dawn, Hoffman ordered all remaining tanks driven to a ravine where engineers prepared controlled demolition charges. As the sun rose, he watched his Tiger's machines he had once believed invincible, reduced to twisted metal by their own crews. "It feels like sacrilege," said Sergeant Brandt, standing beside him as the last detonation echoed through the hills. "It's acceptance," Hoffman corrected him, "the kind we should have found after those tests with the Sherman." They buried identification documents and insignia that would mark them as members of the Waffen-SS Tiger Battalion. Dressed in ordinary Wehrmacht uniforms taken from abandoned supply trucks, the crew members split into small groups to increase their chances of reaching American lines rather than Soviet ones. Hoffman led 6 men westward, traversing fields and forests to avoid main roads. On the 3rd day, near a small stream, they encountered an American patrol led by a lieutenant named Davidson. The surrender was tense but dignified. When asked his unit, Hoffman hesitated only briefly before answering truthfully. 501st Heavy Tank Battalion, Tiger Commanders. Lieutenant Davidson's eyebrows rose. "Tigers, we've been hunting your kind for months." He studied Hoffman curiously. "You boys gave us hell until recently. What changed?" Hoffman considered his answer carefully. "We ran into reality, Lieutenant. It hits harder than any tank gun." To Hoffman's surprise, the Americans treated them with professional courtesy. They were processed as standard POWs rather than SS personnel, which would have meant harsher treatment. During his interrogation, Hoffman met Captain James Miller, an intelligence officer who specialized in German armored warfare. "You're the one who tested the captured EZ-8, Miller said, entering the interrogation room with a file folder. "Your report made it to our intelligence service. Quite thorough work." Hoffman stared in shock. "How did you get that?" "It was classified," Miller smiled. "The same way we got most of our best intelligence. Someone in your command thought it was important enough to make sure we saw it." He sat across from Hoffman. Your findings matched our own evaluations exactly. The 76mm gun was a game changer, but it almost didn't happen. Our generals resisted the upgrade initially. Why? Hoffman asked. It made the Sherman twice as lethal. Production disruption, retraining crews, the usual bureaucratic resistance to change. Miller shrugged. Sound familiar? Hoffman nodded slowly. Our high command refused to acknowledge the test results. They said it would damage morale. That's the tragedy of this war, Miller replied. On both sides, the best technical solutions often lost to political considerations. The conversation shifted from interrogation to professional discussion between two tank experts. Miller explained how American industry had debated building heavier tanks similar to the Tiger but ultimately chose quantity and reliability over armor and firepower. We could have built Tigers, Miller explained, but we couldn't have built thousands of them and still produced everything else we needed. The Sherman wasn't the best tank, but it was the right tank for the war we were fighting. Hoffman was transferred to a POW camp in France, where he spent 6 months before being cleared for early release due to his technical knowledge. Rather than returning to a divided Germany, he accepted an offer to work with British and American engineers, evaluating captured German equipment. In the summer of 1946, at Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, Hoffman found himself standing beside a familiar sight, a Tiger tank captured intact during the final German retreat. Next to it sat an M4A3E8 Sherman, its 76mm gun pointed skyward. "We're recreating your tests," explained Colonel Wright, the facility commander. "Your data was valuable, but our brass wants American confirmation." Hoffman watched with déjà vu as the two tanks were put through comparative trials. This time, there was no denial of the results. The Sherman's mobility, reliability, and gun effectiveness were acknowledged alongside the Tiger's superior armor and main gun. The perfect tank was never built, Colonel Wright concluded after the tests. But the decisive factor wasn't the best tank it was, having the right tank in the right place with the right support. Later that year, Hoffman was invited to contribute to a comprehensive analysis of armored warfare lessons from the European theatre. His insights on the psychological impact of perceived technical superiority and the danger of institutional resistance to evidence became foundational concepts in post-war military doctrine. At a conference in 1948, Hoffman encountered Samuel Harrison again, now a major working on the development of America's new generation of tanks. Over dinner, Harrison shared design plans for what would become the M48 pattern. "We're incorporating everything we learned from capturing your tanks," Harrison explained. "The sloped armor of the Panther, the heavy gun of the Tiger, but with American reliability and mass production capabilities." "And what did you learn from our mistakes?" Hoffman asked. Harrison's expression grew serious. "That technology alone doesn't win wars. It's the integration of technology with realistic doctrine, proper logistics, and adaptability." He raised his glass. "Your Tigers were magnificent machines, Klaus, but our Shermans were part of a magnificent system." In 1952, Hoffman was offered American citizenship and a position consulting for the Pentagon. He accepted both, eventually settling in Virginia, where he established a respected career analyzing Soviet tank developments during the Cold War. On the 30th anniversary of the Ardennes offensive, Hoffman returned to Germany for the first time, visiting the site where they had tested the captured Sherman. The proving ground was abandoned, reclaimed by forest, with only concrete firing positions remaining as evidence of what had transpired there. As he stood in the spot where Colonel Becker had refused to accept the Sherman's superiority, Hoffman reflected on how that moment of denial had epitomized the larger failure of German leadership, the inability to adapt when confronted with unwelcome truth. He later wrote in his memoirs, "The Sherman versus Tiger debate misses the essential point. It wasn't about which tank was better in isolation, but which tank better served its army's strategic needs. The Americans built a good enough tank in overwhelming numbers, supported by a logistical system that kept it fueled, armed, and moving forward. We built exceptional tanks that too often sat immobilized, waiting for fuel, spare parts, or bridges strong enough to bear their weight." The lesson transcends military technology. In any competitive endeavor, success comes not from achieving perfection in one area, but from creating a balanced system without critical vulnerabilities. The Tiger, for all its fearsome reputation, was a tactical solution to a strategic problem, and strategy will always triumph over tactics in the long run. Hoffman's final public appearance came in 1985 at the Armour School at Fort Knox, where he addressed a new generation of American tank commanders training on M1 Abrams tanks machines that finally combined the firepower and protection of the Tiger with the reliability and strategic mobility of the Sherman. "Your new tanks are impressive," he told the young officers, "but never forget that it's not the machine that ultimately prevails, but the organization that operates it. The willingness to see clearly, adapt quickly, and overcome institutional resistance to change, these are your true weapons." After the lecture, a young lieutenant approached him with a question that Hoffman had been asked countless times. "Sir, if you could go back to 1944, with what you know now, what would you have done differently?" Hoffman's answer was immediate. "I wouldn't have tried to build a better Tiger. I would have built a better army, one that valued truth over comfort, adaptation over tradition, and reality over myth." As the Cold War ended and new conflicts emerged, Hoffman's analysis gained renewed appreciation. Military historians cited the captured Sherman tests as a classic case study in the dangers of confirmation bias and institutional resistance to uncomfortable truths. In military academies worldwide, the story became a standard teaching example of how technological advantages must be honestly assessed, properly integrated into doctrine, and supported by logistics to be truly effective. Hoffman passed away peacefully in 1996, having witnessed the complete transformation of armored warfare from the Tiger and Sherman to the digital battlefield. At his request, his ashes were scattered at Aberdeen Proving Ground, where American and German tanks stood side by side not as enemies, but as artifacts from which new generations could learn. His epitaph, chosen from his own writings, summarized the lesson of that snowy day in 1944, when German crews first confronted the reality of their situation. "The most dangerous weapon in war is not the enemy's strength, but your own unwillingness to see it clearly." Today, military strategists still reference the Sherman versus Tiger debate when discussing defense procurement, emphasizing Hoffman's core insight. The best weapon is not necessarily the most impressive on paper, but the one that best serves your overall strategy while being available when and where needed. The legacy of those tests lives on in modern doctrine that prioritizes balanced capabilities over excellence in a single domain, and in leadership training that emphasizes the courage to accept and adapt to unwelcome realities, rather than clinging to comfortable myths. As one modern general put it, "The Tiger may have won tank versus tank battles, but the Sherman won the war." That distinction makes all the difference. In military museums around the world, the Tiger and Sherman still face each other across exhibit halls, a frozen moment from a conflict that reshaped the world. Visitors marvel at the Tiger's imposing bulk and fearsome reputation, but it's the humble Sherman, with its accessible design and sheer ubiquity, that tells the true story of industrial warfare. The final word perhaps belongs to Hoffman himself, from notes found after his death. "We thought we were building the ultimate tank, but the Americans were building victory. Their approach wasn't perfect, but it was sufficient, and in war, as in life, sufficient in abundance will always overcome excellent but scarce. That is the lesson I learned too late, watching an American 76mm shell penetrate our supposed invincibility from a range we had believed safe." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.